Hi, I'm Dave, the tomato guy. Thanks for coming today. Looks like we got a lot of tomato people out here. Growing tomatoes seems to be difficult for a lot of people, and we're going to make it easy. We're going to grow tomatoes easily, and this means grow your whole vegetable garden easily. I retired, I say probably about 10 years ago, and growing and talking homegrown tomatoes is my hobby. There's just no way you can beat the flavor of those homegrown tomatoes. I probably speak to 15, 20, 25 different clubs and organizations every year, and I'm on the web. You can find me. You see it on the screen right now if you're looking at your computer screen. If you forget or can't find me, just simply go to Google and type in Dave the Tomato Guy. I should come up number one. Click it on, bookmark it, and you're going to see everything that we're going to be talking about today contained in that website, blog site. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to keep it specific. I'm going to tell you exactly how to grow tomatoes easily. In less than a year, I have had way over 11,000 people so far visit my website, blog site, and everything that we're going to be talking about is going to be there. Go ahead, bookmark it, and as I said, if you forget it, go ahead, type it in, Dave the Tomato Guy. I should pop up like number one. Okay, on the screen you see the blog site, Blogspot, growtomatoeseasily.blogspot.com, and you see all the different subjects that you're going to find when you go online and check this out. We're talking about sunshine, how much, potting soil for containers. I will show you exactly which ones I recommend. Backyard planting, deep water pipes, what are they, how do they work, when to plant, what are the best times to plant, what is proper watering, fertilizers, which fertilizer should you use, steer manure tea, how to make that, why those tomato plants love it so much, what variety of tomato plant. You can't just put anything in the ground and expect a lot of tomatoes. There's thousands of different kinds of tomatoes. Self-watering containers, how do these work? A full-grown tomato plant will use 2 to 3 gallons of water every day, and so these self-watering containers help you not run out of water. Tomato cages, heavy-duty tomato cages, why they're important. Should you plant live plants or should you start from seed? What about mulching? What is mulching? And it's putting a layer down on top of the soil to keep that sun from just cooking everything, and I recommend you use straw. Pruning tomatoes. How do you prune tomatoes? What about advanced pruning of tomatoes? Pollination, how you can help pollinate your tomato plants and improve production by 20 or 25% probably. 50 to 100 pounds of tomatoes on one plant. How you can do this. Then we're going to get into a little bit the pests and diseases of the tomato plants, the plant health, just general plant health. Hot weather's the enemy of tomatoes. Blossom end rot, what is that? You know, that black leathery spot on the bottom of the tomatoes that happen once in a while. Powdery mildew, nematodes, rats. When to pick, when do you know to pick, how to store those tomatoes, plus much more. Now on all these subjects that are on YouTube, you can fast forward through from one subject to the next, to the next, to the next, until you get to the particular subject you want to listen to or look at. So keep in mind, you can either fast forward or you can go backwards on it to get to whichever subject that you're interested in. And I tell you, if you don't have a green thumb, I'll give you one. Why? Because I figure if I can do it, you can do it, because I'm going to show you exactly how I do it. With regards to questions, we'll wait till the end of the program. I don't have handouts. That I do have email sign-ups if you want to sign up, and I'll send you an occasional email. Everything that we're going to be talking about today is on my website blog. And remember, if you can't remember my site, just Google Dave the Tomato Guy. I do sell some things making it easier to grow tomatoes. You'll find there's an order form on the website, blog site, and as such things as self-watering containers, heavy-duty cages, deep watering pipes. There are order forms on the website, and I have order forms with me today. I deliver. I'm here in the Southern California area, and I deliver locally for like $10, or you can come by and pick up if you want. And what we're going to do to start off with is we're going to look at some pictures, because I want you to see what you can do. Okay, first slide you're looking at, the handsome guy in the middle there, that's me. What we're looking at is 3 plants total. In here there's 2 better boys and 1 big beef. Each one of these plants has over 100 pounds of beefsteak sized tomatoes on them. These plants have tomato cages that are about 3 feet in diameter, about 7.5, 8 feet tall. And as you can see, there's a way to easily grow a tomato plant with 50 to 100 pounds and more than 100 pounds of tomatoes on them. This is my front yard. This is a planter between my house and a neighbor's house right next to the driveway. On the left is a better boy tomato plant, and right next to it is a big beef, and you can see there's a ton of tomatoes on these. You can do the same. This is a picture of a big beef tomato, and this one has well over 100 pounds of beefsteak sized tomatoes on it. You can see the white ties that tie the vines to the cage. If you didn't have those white ties on there, the weight of these tomatoes would just bring the vines come crashing right down to the ground. This is a Brandywine heirloom tomato. We always hear heirlooms are kind of tough to grow, but as we go along, you follow some tips and suggestions that I give you, and you're going to easily grow heirloom tomatoes exactly like you see in this picture. This is a Brandywine red, and as you can see, there's plenty of tomatoes on it. This tomato plant is called a celebrity, and as you can see, it's growing in that round resin. It's a self-watering container, and I do make and sell those. And always keep in mind, you don't have to have these containers to easily grow tomatoes easily. But anyway, this is a celebrity, and you can see this is just one side of the plant. I cut off the leaves so that you can easily see it's just jammed with tomatoes. That if you were to go around on the other side of the plant, you're going to see the same thing, just jammed with tomatoes. It's a great plant, good tasting tomatoes, and it grows more like a big bush than it does like a vine. Here's another great plant. It's called a champion. This champion tomato plants have been around for it seems like forever. And as you can see, this one's growing in one of the a gray self-watering container, and we're going to talk more about those self-watering containers later. But anyway, this, you can see it's absolutely loaded with tomatoes, and if you were to walk around on the other side of the plant, you're going to see them jammed on the other side too. This tomato plant's called an early girl. Been around for a long time, many years. It's a hybrid. It's growing in it's like a half of a whiskey barrel, half of a wine barrel. It's wooden, and I made it into a self-watering container. But again, you don't need these to successfully grow these tomatoes. But if you look at this tomato plant, you're looking again at one side of it. I cut the leaves back off of it so you can see the tomatoes jammed with tomatoes. If you were to walk around on the other side, you're going to see just as many tomatoes on the other side. So as I told you that if I can do it, you can do it, because I'm going to show you exactly what I do. This tomato plant is called a lemon boy. And as you can see, you get plenty of tomatoes on it. And I'm told with the lemon boy, many people, they'll plant this one because they tell me that there seems to be less acid in these tomatoes, where some of the other types of tomatoes, red tomatoes, seem to have a little bit more on the acid side to them. Lemon boy, people tell me, don't seem to affect them that much. But as you can see, you're going to get a lot of tomatoes. This tomato plant, and you don't find them all everywhere, but if you do run into them, plant one sometime. It's called a San Diego, sometimes called San Diego Red. The tag is going to say it grows like a vine, but in reality, all of them that I've planted grow more like a bush. They don't get much more than about 3 foot high or so, maybe 3.5 foot high, and they'll get about 3 foot wide. And as you can see, you're going to get plenty of tomatoes. Mr. Stripey, this is an heirloom, and as you can see, the tomatoes on it, when they're ripe, they're more on they're a yellow type of tomato. But as you can see, you're going to get a ton of tomatoes. This is a picture of a cherry tomato, probably my favorite cherry tomato. It's called Husky Cherry Red. This one will grow like a big bush, and you will absolutely load up with just absolutely delicious little red cherry tomatoes. And as I said, it's probably one of my favorites. And cherry tomatoes are always going to be of a better flavor, better tasting, in my opinion, than the beefsteaks or the bigger tomatoes. But Husky Cherry Red, a great tomato. This is some of the tomatoes in my backyard, growing in self-watering containers and in the ground. And as you can see, these are big plants with a lot of tomatoes. And it's same old thing. If I can do it, you should be able to do it, because as we continue on, I'm going to show you exactly what I do, and you do the same, and you should have the same results. So we see great tomatoes in the ground and in self-watering containers. So let's talk a little bit, or actually let's show some pictures of other vegetables growing in self-watering containers, and also some of them that are in the ground. So let's take a look. Sweet corn. Take a look at this. Down at the bottom, you see the gray self-watering container. That container's like 18 gallons. Look at the size of that corn. It's probably about close to 10 feet tall. You can easily grow your other garden vegetables also. As you can see, there's a nice pumpkin sitting right there. You can see the little white pipe sticking up out of the self-watering container. Easy to grow some pumpkins in these containers. This picture, what do you see? Yes, a pumpkin. And it's growing in one of the gray self-watering containers. You can see the white water fill pipe right there in the middle. And look at, you got a really nice sized pumpkin there. Easy to do. Green beans. If you like green beans, you'll have no problem growing them. Blackberries. Don't we all love some kind of a berry? But if you grow blackberries in these self-watering containers, and according to what we talk about today, you are going to load up on these blackberries. As you can see, these in the self-watering container, doing very well. Raspberries. Again, growing in a self-watering container. It's like 18 gallons of soil, and it's a healthy looking plant. You're going to get a ton of raspberries. This is a cucumber plant growing in the gray self-watering container. You see how big it is? You can certainly load up on cucumbers easily. This one's an eggplant. I personally, I'm not a crazy about eggplants, but this is at my grandkids' house, and obviously they enjoy eggplants, so we put some eggplants in a self-watering container, and you can see that you're going to get plenty, and they're going to easily grow. What do we have here? Yes, watermelon. Well, planting with the grandkids, and you're going to plant all different kinds of stuff. So grandkids wanted a watermelon, so we put a watermelon plants in a self-watering container, and it was pretty darn easy to grow these. That's that watermelon, and those are my grandkids. That's zucchini you're looking at. You can see a little bit on the white leaves. Seems like that powdery mildew. That mildew gets so easily on the zucchinis, but you're always going to get plenty of zucchini before anything happens. And the container right next to it, those are bell peppers. These are Anaheim chilies. You see these often in the supermarket. Most of the time you see them when they're just green. The longer you leave them on long enough and they're going to turn red. But as you can see, you're going to load up, you're going to get plenty of them. Cucumbers, as you can see, with the right soil, a little bit of sunshine, keep that soil moist, you're going to have plenty of cucumbers. Jalapeno peppers. Really only need maybe about one plant, and it's going to produce plenty of jalapenos for you. This is called a giant Marconi. I've never grown one before, and I put one in, and as you can see, you're going to get plenty of peppers. And they start off green, and the longer you leave them on, they eventually turn red. These guys are a little bit like a bell pepper, but they're way, way bigger than a bell pepper. If you ever see any and you want to try out something new, give them a try. I think you'll enjoy them. Another picture of that giant Marconi. The picture is a Carolina raspberry, and it's growing in one of those gray self-watering containers, and you can see it's a big plant, and you're going to get plenty of berries on them. Berries, like tomatoes, use an awful lot of water, and so when you put them in a container, you're going to see that they're most likely going to grow a lot easier than if you were to put them in your ground. What you're looking at there is a blackberry vine, and it's probably my favorite are the blackberries. And again, you're going to find it very easy to grow blackberries in these self-watering containers. The picture you're looking at right now is a close-up of that same blackberry, and as you can see, you're going to load up on blackberries. You're going to have plenty of vines, plenty of blackberries. Nothing better than to go out and pick and eat blackberries right off the vine. This one's a sweet pea. As you can see, easy to grow sweet peas in a self-watering container, and great to eat. Okay, you've seen great tomatoes, you've seen great vegetables, and now let's talk about how you can do the same. Okay, now we're going to talk about some of the important things that you're going to need to do to grow tomatoes easily, as well as your other garden vegetables. These are the critical things, the important things that you must pay attention to. One is sunshine. How much sunshine do you need? What about potting soil for containers in the backyard? When is the best times to plant? What is proper watering? Fertilizer. What fertilizer should you be using, and when should you be using it? And then, very important, what variety to plant. Let's first talk about sunshine. When we talk about sunshine for tomato plants, and in general your garden, you're going to need at least 3 or 4 hours of sun for the smaller tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. Now, the larger the tomato, the more sunshine you're going to need. And what these tomatoes do, and plants in general, they convert sunlight to food and energy. The more sun that they have, the more food, the more energy, the more tomatoes you're going to have. That if you only have enough sunshine to keep the leaves green and the plant barely alive, you're not going to have any extra food and energy to produce very many tomatoes. So you do need sunshine. Okay, let's start with sunshine. We all have sunshine problems, it seems like, especially those of us that live kind of in the city. We're either being blocked out by neighbors' houses, neighbors' trees, our own house, our own trees. Seems to always be a sunshine problem. And as you can see in the picture, the fellow in a blue hat, that's my neighbor's gardener. And he's out there today pruning his my neighbor's bushes and trees. And one of the first things you want to do is get to know your neighbor's gardener well, and on a first name basis, especially if your neighbor has some trees that are blocking out some of the sunshine. So I tell the gardener, I say, hey, take a look over here. I'm getting ready to do my tomato plants. I need a little sunshine. I see you're trimming all the bushes and trees over here. Can you help me with a little extra sunshine here? And at the same time, I'm going to be happy to I'll help you with a little extra green in your back pocket, a little bit of extra money. And most of the time, you're always going to get the cooperation. As you can see, your trimming gets done. And the end result is going to be you're going to get plenty of sunshine. Pretty good job of trimming that tree, huh? There's no doubt about it. There's going to be plenty of sunshine coming through. There's probably at least 50% of that tree has now been trimmed down, and we've got plenty of sunshine, and that neighbor's gardener is going to get plenty of tomatoes. Okay, that covers sunshine. Pretty easy, huh? You just got to have some sunshine for those tomato plants. Next, let's talk about containers, self-watering containers, backyard soils, raised beds. Which potting soil should you use? This is probably the biggest improvement you can make in planting of your backyard garden, in planting your tomato plants, is to use a great potting mix or a great potting soil. Now, I'm going to give you a choice of 3 potting soils to use, and why? It's because of a product called Moisture Control Sphagnum peat moss that is in these products, and there's a pretty good quantity of it in there. That 1 pound of that sphagnum peat moss can hold up to 25 pounds of water. So what you have is acts like a sponge, keeping moisture around those roots. Now you keep in mind, the more roots, the bigger the top. The bigger the top, the more tomatoes you're going to have. One year I took like 8 of those gray self-watering containers, and I put 8 different kinds of potting mix in them. And then in each one I put the same little big beef tomato plant and gave them all the same amounts. They all had the same sunshine, same water, same fertilizer. Some of those plants were twice as big with twice as many tomatoes and bigger tomatoes than the others. What was the only difference? Yes, the potting mix, the potting soil. Potting mix, potting soil, these terms are interchangeable. But the biggest improvement you're going to make is going to be on your potting mix. And not all potting mixes are equal. This first one's called Nature's Care Organic Potting Mix. You can find it like at the big box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that, or Google it online. But you see where it says organic potting mix with water conserve. That water conserve means it has that sphagnum peat moss, and that's what's going to act like a sponge and keep those roots surrounded with moisture 24/7. This next one is a moisture control potting mix, blue bag. You find it at like Home Depot, Lowe's, places like that. And again, you see where it says moisture control. It has a lot of that sphagnum peat moss, and this is what is going to keep those roots surrounded with the moisture like a sponge. That it's going to give you a big top with lots of tomatoes. This one is not organic. It contains some man-made fertilizer in it, but it's a great potting mix for those of you that are looking to get a really good potting mix. Another organic moisture control potting mix with compost, and this one you can find at Costco. I have not seen it anywhere else other than Costco, and Costco only sells it during the springtime. You cannot get it year round. So if you're looking for a great organic type potting mix with that moisture control, which is that sphagnum peat moss, this is a great one to use. After you pick whichever potting mix, potting soil that you'd like to use, and I suggest you only use one of those three because of that sphagnum peat moss. It's going to hold lots and lots of water around the roots. But once you pick the potting mix that you're going to use, you're going to want to pick up some of the composted steer manure with compost. Here it's called steer manure blend, but you can find it in the big box stores. It comes in like a 1 cubic foot bag. One bag you're looking at here is like $1.25. In a container, you're only going to use maybe 1/4 of this bag, maybe 1/3 of the bag. When you spread it around on the ground in your garden area, you almost can't use too much of this stuff. It's great stuff, so be prepared to pick up some of this. Okay, let's start with backyard planting. You're going to be planting in your backyard. And remember when we talked about the biggest improvement that you can make in planting your garden in your backyard is by improving your soil. So we're talking here about planting a tomato plant or tomato plants. You're going to start with digging a hole 2 foot deep, 2 foot wide, and then you're going to toss the dirt away. You do not need that dirt. You're going to make sure that hole drains, so you're going to fill it with water. And if that water doesn't drain within 24 hours, you're going to have to dig that hole deeper. So after you've filled it with water, it's drained out, you're going to fill that hole with one of those great potting mixes or those great potting soils that you've seen pictures of. And then you're going to add like a bag of that composted steer manure with compost. Just spread it around on top. And then if possible, for your tomato plants, because they have a deeper root system, you want to add some deep watering pipes. But if you don't do it, you're still going to get plenty of tomatoes. This is a picture of digging a hole 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and then filling that hole with water. Then you're going to fill that hole with a great potting mix, and you're either going to pick this one, Nature's Care, or you're going to pick this one, which is the Miracle Grow Moisture Control Potting Mix, which has a little bit of the man-made fertilizer in it. You'll use this to fill up that hole, or fill up that hole with this Organic Choice. It's an organic potting mix, and this particular one you can only find it at Costco, but it's great. It's a great potting mix to use. After you fill it up with that great potting mix of your choice of one of those three types, then you're going to spread around some of this steer manure blend, or it's composted steer manure with compost. And all your big box stores carry this in like 1 cubic foot bags, and they're going to charge you about $1, $1.25. And as I say, when you're spreading it around in your backyard garden, you almost can't use too much of this. This is great stuff. This is a picture of the holes that have been dug, and you also are seeing a picture of the deep water pipes we talked about. They have the holes in them that go down in the ground. You dig a hole and slip them down in there, and then when you fill them up with water, you get to water down deep. And you notice these deep water pipes are on the outside of the holes that you dug for the tomatoes. This is a picture when you're finished. You filled in all the holes with one of those great potting mixes, spread around a lot of the composted steer manure on top. You see those wooden stakes? That's the middle of the hole. So the middle of the hole, that's where you're going to plant your tomato plant. Always be careful. Don't forget where you dug that hole. You certainly don't want to start over on that. Some of the dirt, it's like digging into cement. The white pipes, those are the pipes that down below have holes in them. They go down about 1.5 feet. You fill those up with water, and they're going to get your moisture down deep and encourage those roots to grow towards the moisture. Remember, this is all about great soil, where you're gonna have those roots surrounded by moisture all the time. The more roots you have, the bigger the top you get. The bigger the top you get, the more tomatoes you're going to have. The opposite, if you think about it, is what? That the very opposite is you're going to have a very small root system, and then you're going to have a very small top. And this is commonly known as a bonsai plant, and you certainly don't want to be known in the neighborhood as the tomato person that grows bonsai tomatoes. We've already touched on the deep water pipes, so this is just a little reminder. This is only for in the ground type plants, and you're still going to water around the base of your tomato plant. The deep water pipes are going to get that water down deep, and it's going to be wide. It encourages those roots to grow towards the water. And don't forget, big root system means big top, means lots of tomatoes. Just another picture of those deep water pipes. You see how you dig that hole, use a post hole digger, put it on the outside of the holes, get down deep. You want that water down there to encourage lots of roots to grow. Just another finished product on those deep water pipes. You almost can't have too many in there. With tomato plants, it's good. Put one pipe on each side. And if you put a couple of extra out in the garden, hey, it's going to do nothing but help get that moisture everywhere. Okay, that's it when it comes to talking about soil. Remember that soil is probably the most important thing you are going to do to improve your garden this next time you plant. Most of us just plant in the dirt. We add a little bit of compost, a little bit of whatever, and say, okay, this is for you little happy guys to produce lots of tomatoes, and most of the time it just doesn't work. Got to have great soil. So the next area we're going to move over to is what are the best planting times. Now locally here in the Southern California area, it's going to be like in early March. And why would it be in early March? Because of pollination times. And if you think about it now, tomatoes pollinate, they send pollen to the blossoms when the nighttime temperature in general is about 55 degrees. And they stop pollinating when the hot weather comes, and the hot weather is like 85, 90 degrees. So you want to put them in the ground as close to when those nighttime temperatures are going to get to be about 55 degrees, and you want to get them nice and big and mature before the heat wave comes. So There are hot weather tomatoes. If you're going to be planting in hot weather, they have names like Phoenix, Solar Fire, this sort of thing. The label on a tomato plant will say that they're heat tolerant, and they'll produce tomatoes when it's like 90 degrees outside. But we don't want those right now, you know, unless it happens to be like 85 degrees outside, or it's going to be shortly. Winter tomatoes we're not going to talk much about right now, but you would plant winter tomatoes here in Southern California around the end of August, and you would plant, for the most part, the same type of tomatoes that you would plant right now in the springtime, with the exception, back off a little bit on those heirlooms and back off a little bit on big, huge beefsteak type tomato plants, because the days are going to be shorter. You're not going to have as much daylight, and you're moving from hot weather to cooler weather. Okay, that covered what are the best planting times. So next, let's talk about proper watering. Watering's a big thing when it comes to tomato plants. A mature tomato plant can use 2 to 3 gallons of water every day. In your backyard soil, you want to water deep. You want to get 2 to 3 feet down. You're going to slow water. Remember that hole you dug? You're going to slowly fill up that hole that has all that great potting mix in it with water until it begins to run off over the top. If you have deep water pipes in, you're going to fill those deep water pipes a couple of times. Remember, those are located just outside of the hole, and encourages those deep roots to be growing over towards the moisture. If you have containers, you're going to water those containers till either the water comes out the overflow hole in your self-watering containers or out the bottom in your regular containers. And keep in mind, tomato, you want to plant them in at least a 15-gallon tomato container, or even 20 gallons is better, and you only want 1 tomato plant per container. Watering in the mornings is better than the evenings. Why? In the mornings, when you get water all over the place, it's going to evaporate from the sunshine a lot quicker. In the evening time, you get water all over the place, and it lingers all night, and water does nothing but attract disease and pests. You want to avoid getting water on the leaves, including from the lawn sprinklers. We'll see a little bit later when we look at the mildew, the white leaves, that comes a lot from the moisture, too much moisture floating around in the air, and then the little spores come in, and you get that mildew all over the place. Now, keep in mind, 80 to 90% of that water, that 2 or 3 gallons that every one of those mature tomato plants use, 80 to 90% of that water used transports minerals, food, and nutrients up to the top, up to the growing tips. That once this water has transported the minerals and the food and the nutrients up to the top, then this water eventually evaporates out through the leaves. So if you don't have that 2 to 3 gallons of water going up there, you don't have a very big plant. So make sure you give those plants plenty. The picture you see here is a deep water pipe. It's painted black, you know, it kind of keeps the neighbors happy. And these tomato plants are in the front yard, and so you don't have a neighbor next to you with these white pipes coming up all over his planters. But fill up these deep water pipes a couple of times. You're going to also fill up the hole that you dug right around the base of the tomato plant. You want to make sure you got plenty of moisture, and you got plenty of moisture down deep. This is one of the gray self-watering containers, and as you can see, the water hose is in the water fill pipe, and you fill it up until that's the overflow hole. Each one of these containers holds like about 3 to 4 gallons of water, and you just want to keep that water reservoir full. And when you have it full, you're going to have plenty of moisture around those roots, and you're going to get a big top. So that's it on the watering. You can see watering is pretty easy. Just don't let the the reservoir run dry, keep those roots moist, especially during hot weather. Keep those roots moist all the time. Now, let's talk about fertilizers now. What fertilizers should you use? Tomato plants are very heavy users of fertilizer. And whether you're going to use an organic or a regular man-made type fertilizer, use a liquid. Why a liquid? Because when you use a dry organic type packaged fertilizer, most of the time on the instructions it'll say open the package, sprinkle it around your plants, water it down, and then wait for it to rot and decompose where the plant can take up all those nutrients. And this is going to take like probably a couple months. You don't have a couple months. Tomato season's over. Your gardening season's over. When you use a liquid fertilizer, those plants can take up that fertilizer immediately. So make sure you use a liquid, and then you always follow the directions on the fertilizer package. But anyway, tomato plants are very heavy users of fertilizer. This is an example of an organic fertilizer made by Kellogg's, and this fertilizer is made for gardens, as you can see in the picture. You know, he's got some strawberries in his hand and all that. The three numbers that come with most, you want them to be kind of even. I think on this one, organic plus by Kellogg's and made for vegetable gardens is like a 222. You most importantly, you want a liquid fertilizer, and you want that fertilizer to be for vegetable gardens. This is not organic. This is a man-made fertilizer, and it's made by Miracle-Gro, and as you can see on the package or on the box, it says tomato plant food, and this is good for all your vegetables at the same time though. But this one comes, it's granular, so you mix like a tablespoon in a gallon of water, and it dissolves just like Kool-Aid, and then when you pour it around your tomato plants or your vegetables, it can be taken up immediately by the plant because it's in liquid form. Okay, we just finished covering the fertilizer. Remember, your plants, your tomato plants are heavy users. Make sure you use a liquid and follow the directions. And when you give them a gallon of fertilizer, pour the whole gallon around a plant. Don't give each plant like a cup of fertilizer. Be generous with it. So let's move on and talk about making a steer manure tea. Now, your plants are going to love this, and this is in addition to your fertilizers, but you're going to take a half a bag of, remember that composted steer manure that you buy, the 1 cubic foot bag for about $1. You're going to take a half of that bag, you're going to put it in a burlap bag, tie it shut, then you're going to put it in a 30, 40, or 50, or 100 gallon trash barrel, and once it's just absolutely nasty, and that's after probably 3 or 4 days, you're going to pour this around the base of your tomato plants. Your roots are going to take it up immediately, and your tomato plants are going to love you immensely. This is a picture of the steer manure blend, the composted steer manure with steer manure. You're going to use about half that bag. You're going to put it in that burlap bag. That's the picture you're looking at. Okay, then like a giant tea bag, you put it in that 40 gallon trash barrel and fill it up with water, just like a tea bag. You're going to come out, swish it around every day till that water just gets absolutely nasty, and there you're going to have your steer manure tea. The picture you're looking at right now, that's a 100-gallon trash container, and there's like 3 big old burlap tea bags in there, and then there's like probably 90 gallons of water, and you can see it beginning to foam a little bit at top, just getting absolutely nasty, and that's when those tomato plants are going to love it the most. This is a picture of that 100 gallons of steer manure tea, and I'm a little on the lazy side, as you can see, as I hook up a pump and I pump that steer manure tea to the tomato plants. That's just a picture of me holding the hose, pumping that steer manure tea to one of the self-watering containers with a tomato plant in it. Those tomato plants absolutely love this steer manure tea. If you can do this a couple times a week, it's great. If it's only once a week, that's great. If that's all you use to water these things with, they would love it. Okay, that covers that steer manure tea, and if you can use that steer manure tea, your plants are going to love every minute of it. And if you can't do it, you're still going to get a lot of tomatoes. So next, what we're going to talk about is what variety, which tomato plant should you buy. There are thousands of varieties, thousands of different kinds of tomato plants. So number one, you're going to get a tomato plant or plants that are going to produce a lot of tomatoes. That's number one. Then you want to talk or think about getting heirloom tomatoes. These are tomatoes that have been around for like 50 years. They've been in families forever and ever. Brandywines are some of them, or Cherokee Purple, plants such as these. And when you plant the seeds of heirloom, the seeds will replicate the parent. Hybrids are crossing two or more. This is what makes a hybrid tomato, two or more tomato plants that have been crossed. Now, some people say, I never plant hybrids, only heirlooms. Well, keep in mind that every heirloom out there is a hybrid. At some point, that heirloom tomato was crossed with another tomato to produce the heirloom. The heirloom has just been around for a long time, and the seeds replicate the parent, whereas the hybrid, that's not always the case. As far as GMO tomatoes, there are no GMO tomatoes at present. When we talk about kinds of tomato plants, we have indeterminate, that's the ones with the vines, and then we have determinants. Those are bush-like. The label, the tag, when you buy the plant will say which is which. I normally plant quite a few of the indeterminants, the ones that grow like a vine. Now, what do you plant? What size? I do the live 4-inch size. And like I say, we're gonna grow some heirlooms, try some brandywines, and when we get into some of the hybrids, some of my favorites are like the Big Beef and the Better Boy, and probably the Better Boy is my #1 favorite, and I think the Better Boy is very easy to grow anywhere in the United States. So when it comes to volunteer plants that just come up on their own around the yard and in containers, get rid of them. You don't even know what they are, and for $2 or $3 you buy a brand new tomato that's ready to go. You know what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of tomatoes. And when you have last year tomatoes that are still growing and you trim on them and they still grow, you're going to get some tomatoes, especially on the cherry sized tomatoes are going to come in. But if you're going to keep them, but put some new ones in where you know you're going to get a lot of tomato plants. That's a picture of a Big Beef. Great tomato, great tasting, very similar to the Better Boy. Doesn't get any better than that. Thin skin, nice and sweet. The picture you're looking at here is a Better Boy. That's, as I say, probably my favorite tomato plant. You are going to get a lot of tomatoes when you plant a Better Boy. They grow like a vine. They're in the indeterminate, and thin skin, nice sweet, beefsteak size. I think you'll love them. Once you have some tomato plants in there that are going to give you a lot of tomatoes, go ahead and try some heirlooms. What you see here in the picture, these are in self-watering containers. These are like 5 different kinds of Brandywine heirlooms, and Brandywine probably always comes in the top 3 when it comes to taste tests across the United States. So try some heirlooms by using great soil, keeping the roots moist. You're going to grow some heirlooms, and you're going to get as many heirlooms as those tomato plants are capable of producing. That's a Brandywine heirloom, and you can see there's plenty of tomatoes on it, and it is a healthy looking tomato plant, and you're going to get plenty of heirloom tomatoes. This is a picture of a pink Brandywine. It's an heirloom, and as you can see in the picture, that plant is absolutely loaded with Brandywine pink heirloom tomatoes. And you see the one sitting on the scale. There's a couple of them sitting right there. These weighed in over 2 pounds each. A great tomato plant. Try the Brandywine pink sometime. I'm sure you're going to like it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about these self-watering containers and how they work. Now, we talked about the mature tomato plants can use 2 to 3 gallons of water every day. And these containers, down in the very bottom of them, there is a reservoir down there that holds about 4 gallons of water. And there's a false bottom in there. Attached to that false bottom is a basket. The basket sits down into the water. When you fill it up with potting mix, you put that potting mix all the way down into the bottom, and some of that potting mix is sitting in the water, and the water comes towards the top just like the wick of a kerosene lamp. Or if you were to put a piece of cloth in a glass of water, you see the water come up the cloth. That's exactly what this does in these self-watering containers. But it's absolutely necessary you choose one of those 3 of the great potting soils, and you need to choose a great tomato plant, 1 per container. Plant at a good time of year. Give it plenty of sunshine, liquid fertilizer. Bingo! You're going to, with tomato plants or most vegetables, you're going to have a great crop. That's a lemon boy in one of the gray self-watering containers. Right next to it is that San Diego tomato plant. You see, you're going to get a lot of tomatoes. The picture you're looking at is a celebrity tomato. That's the one, grows like a big bush. And this one happens to be in one of the round resin self-watering containers. And as you can see, that plant is just absolutely loaded with tomatoes, and you're only looking at one side of the plant. The other side has every bit as many tomatoes. Okay, let's talk about heavy-duty tomato cages, staking up tomatoes. If you use this great soil and you follow these tips and suggestions we've been talking about, you're going to grow a big plant. And if you have a big plant, you're going to need a heavy-duty cage to keep the fruit up off the ground. And once it's up off the ground, you're going to need to use zip ties to hold those vines to the cage, or use some yarn or whatever you want to use. But if you don't, from the weight of the tomatoes, those vines are going to come crashing down. So probably the most popular on the cages is the 2-foot diameter by about 5.5 feet tall. So some people will like them 7-8 foot tall. There are tomato plants that will grow 10 to 15 feet tall. But yeah, do you want to be up on a ladder trying to tend to them and take care of them? So the ones I make and do are for the most part, most are the 5.5 foot tall, and then I do kind of a maximum of 7 to 8 foot tall. And if you want to have a cage for a plant that's going to produce like 100 pounds of tomatoes, you're going to need about a 3-foot diameter cage by 7 or 8 foot tall. And doesn't matter whether you get a cage from me or where you get it, but when you grow these great tomatoes, you're going to need a heavy-duty cage, so get one somewhere. That's just basically a picture of the cage, you know, sitting on one of the self-watering containers. And the same thing, you use the same cage to set in the ground. So, but you're going to need a heavy-duty cage. Okay, let's talk a little bit how to plant those tomatoes that you buy from the store, and should you buy live plants or should you grow from seed? Now, live plants are the easiest. The little seeds, you know, it's kind of like you got to babysit them every day, make sure that they're coming along and don't run out of water and get plenty of sunlight and all that sort of thing. So live plants are the easiest, and if you can't find the live plants, then I go ahead and use the seeds. And when you buy your tomato plants at the store, at your big box store, whether it's Home Depot, Lowe's, Armstrong Nursery, your local nurseries, get the 4-inch size, even 5 or 6-inch size, okay. But you don't want the little pony packs where you get about 6 of them in a container, because there's so very little soil in them, they dry out so quickly and easily. Those little plants half the time are way overstressed by the time you get them. And you don't want the big old huge gallon size, because most of the time those guys are not going to do very well by the time you transplant them. Sometimes they've got blossoms and tomatoes on them. They're just a mess. So buy healthy, stocky, dark green plants. Don't be picking up anything that's leggy, nothing wilty, nothing drooping, no yellow leaves. And then once you get them bought, get them in the ground, get them planted. Don't be the person that brings them home and say, well, I'm going to put them out on the patio and I'll get to them tomorrow. And then 3 days later you say, oh, forgot all about those. I better give them some water. And you get out there to give them a little water and they're practically laying on the patio. They're so dehydrated. So, and then once you get them purchased, get them planted, space them 3 feet apart, 4 feet if you can, 3.5 feet. Label each plant as you plant. If you plant yourself, if you have a lousy tomato, and then you say, gosh, I don't even know what it was, well, you're probably going to buy it again next year. And by the same token, if you've got a great tomato and you know what it is, you can go out of your way to make sure you plant another one of those next year. So when it comes to planting deep, you don't need to plant deep. And what planting deep means is when you take it out of that little 4-inch size and you plant everything into the ground except the top third of the tomato plant that's growing, and you strip down some of the leaves off the sides of the stem. You don't need to do any of that. Just take it out of the container and plant it at the same depth as it was in that little container, because you're using great soil. This is just a picture of different tomato plants in the self-watering containers, just getting started growing. They're going to grow quickly and you're going to get plenty of tomatoes. Okay, let's talk about mulching. Let's talk about using straw for mulching and the importance of mulching. I use a bale of straw, and I put down around the tomato plants that are in the ground or in the planters about 3 to 5 inch thick layer, and it'll peel right off the bale as you peel it, as you remove it from the bale of straw. It'll come off in like 3 or 4 inch thick layers of straw. Lay them around those little tomato plants. What this is going to do, it's going to keep the soil cool, and the roots are going to grow right up to underneath the bottom side of that straw. It prevents the water from evaporating, it prevents weeds from coming up, and it gives you a barrier from the pests and diseases that are laying on top of the soil. So you don't want to put down the straw too early in the season, because remember, you want to have warm soil. The tomato plants want that warm 55-degree soil. So wait till it starts to warm up a little bit, and then go ahead and put down the straw, and it's certainly going to help when that heat wave comes in. Okay, as you can see, when you take the straw off the bale, it's going to come in some layers. Just go ahead and peel off those layers. They're going to be 3, 4, 5 inches thick. Lay them on each side of the tomato plant. What you're looking at is a picture of that straw. You see the little tomato plants? That's that planter in my front yard. You see those little tomato plants? The straw comes off in like a nice kind of thick layer. Lay it on each side of the tomato plant. Once you have it down on each side of the tomato plant, then in between you fill in with the loose straw that you have laying around. And this gives you just a great barrier and a lot of protection from that hot sun that's going to be coming soon. This is the temperature, the surface temperature on a hot day, and the main reason you're going to use this straw as a mulch. You want a nice thick coarse type of a mulch. Straw works great. You want something that the air can pass through easily, and moisture and fertilizer and all the rest can go through very easily. But you see in the picture that temperature gauge is 118 degrees surface temperature. The outside air temperature is like 85 or 90. But when you measure the surface temperature of your patio or the soil around those tomato plants, it's going to be 20, sometimes as much as 30 degrees hotter. And tomato plants like warm soil, but they don't like hot soil. This thermometer shows you down below underneath the straw, whereas on top it's 115, 120 degrees surface temperature. Way down underneath the straw, it's closer to the normal outdoor temperature that you have that day, which this shows, I think it's about 85 or so. Okay, that covers mulching, and you can, it's okay. It's good to go ahead and mulch around your container plants too. It helps keep the moisture from evaporating. It helps quite a bit. So now let's talk about pruning. How and when should you prune? And with pruning, there is really no right, there is no wrong. If your plant is growing out of control, and you're going to find you're going to have some aggressive growth with your plants if you've followed all the using the correct potting soil and fertilizers and stuff. But if it's out of control, you go ahead and prune it. You go ahead and top it. Don't cut too much though. You don't want to end up with sun scald on your tomatoes. So if you cut too much of the shade away, you can run that chance where you get the sun scald. Now, don't forget determinant. Tomatoes grow like a bush. You want to prune the lower leaves that come into contact with the soil. The indeterminate, they grow like a vine. You also want to prune the lower leaves that come into contact with the soil. But otherwise, the ones that grow like a bush, you're not going to have to prune them if at all as they grow. It's going to be the ones that grow like a vine that you're going to end up topping or cutting off some of the vines. Always remember, vines and suckers are the same thing. Every vine will produce tomatoes. Every sucker will produce tomatoes. They're the same thing. Okay, that covers pruning. Pretty simple, huh? If it's out of control, go ahead and cut some of the vines off. Just don't prune so much where the plant thinks it's dying. But it's okay to go ahead and top it or to thin it out. Let's talk now about advanced pruning, and this is more for the indeterminate varieties, those that grow like a vine. On the advanced pruning, what you're trying to do is get a good balance between the amount of fruit that you have growing on your tomato plant and the amount of vines that, remember the sunshine that delivers all the food and energy. That food and energy is going to the growing tips, the vines, and it's going to the fruit. It's going everywhere. So you want to have a good balance where you get some nice big tomatoes and plenty of tomatoes. So and if you don't do any of this, you're still going to get a lot of tomatoes. So this is just kind of a little bit of fun if you want to get into a little bit of the advanced pruning. But number one, don't plant deep. Remember, we talked about that. However your plant comes, plant it at that same depth as it was in that little container when you bought it. You want to use a heavy-duty cage, and as the plant grows, you want to train the vines that coming out naturally from the main growing stem of the tomato plant. You want to train those vines to go towards the outside of the cage. Doesn't take much. You train and attach those vines to grow up the outside of the cage, and you're going to use zip ties or yarn, whatever, to attach these vines to each of the vertical wires running up the outside of the cage. So for example, if you have 10 to 12 vertical wires running up the outside of the cage, you're going to have 10 to 12 vines attached. All the other vines and suckers, you're going to clip them off. With every leaf, every time you see a leaf growing on that tomato vine, you're going to see a new little vine or sucker start to grow. You want to clip these off. Vines want to grow everywhere, and if you're not careful, you have too much of the food and energy that's going into the vines and not enough that's going into the tomatoes. So anyway, clip all these little vines and shoots except those that are attached to the vertical wires. As you see in the picture, as the vines start to grow, you can use a little piece of little bamboo and kind of hold them down and train them to go towards the outside of the cage. You're just trying to get the vines to go outside. As your vines grow and they're going up the outside of the cage, the vertical wires, you're going to be attaching them to the vertical wire with a zip tie or yarn or whatever, and then every time you have a leaf, you're going to have another shoot come up, and those shoots you want to keep trimmed off. This picture shows you using zip ties. You just zip tie those vines to the cage. If you don't, when you get a load of tomatoes on there, the tomatoes are going to be heavy enough, they're going to pull the whole vine right down to the ground. This next picture, you're going to see that if you got up on top of your cage and you look down the center of the cage, it's going to look hollow inside there. All your vines are growing up the outside of the cage, and they're zip tied to the vertical wires that are going up the outside of the cage. You want to watch for, and you want to clip all the little new vines and suckers, and they're going to want to grow everywhere. Every time a leaf comes, you're going to have a new vine or a new sucker. And at the base of the plant, down at the bottom, you're going to have all kinds of new little shoots wanting to grow up in the middle. Clip all these out. And keep in mind, if you don't do any of this that we're talking about, you're still going to have plenty of tomatoes. This is that picture looking down from the top into the center of that tomato. All the vines are growing up the outside. This is a picture, and you can see the vines growing up the outside. Each of those vines is attached to one of the vertical wires going up to the top, and if you follow each one of those vines, you see it's absolutely loaded with tomatoes, and if you didn't have it attached, those vines would all come crashing down. So this is one of the tomato plants that has over 100 pounds of tomatoes on it. This is a picture of those 3 tomato plants, 2 Better Boy, 1 Big Beef. These are the ones that are each have over 100 pounds of tomatoes growing up the outside of those big tomato cages, attached to the vertical wires with I use zip ties, and you can see you can easily just absolutely load up on tomatoes. Okay, so much for pruning, so much for advanced pruning. Let's talk a little bit about pollination, how you can add 20, maybe 25% more tomatoes on each one of your plants, how you can help pollinate those plants. Keep in mind, tomatoes are self-pollinators, and what that means is each flower contains both the male and the female parts. Until your nighttime temperatures, this is generally speaking, are about 55 degrees, nighttime temperatures, and your daytime temperatures are below 85, there's not going to be any pollen. So when it's 55 and warmer at night, you're going to get pollen. When it's below 85 during the day, you're going to get pollen. Out of those zones, the tomato plant knows it's either too cold or it's too hot, and it does not develop any pollen. It just kind of goes into a growing or survival mode until the right temperatures come around. Anytime you want to pollinate, you have to shake, tap, vibrate those blossoms, and you'll see the pollen drop. That tomato plant sends a little a code, a little signal to each of the blossoms when it's time to develop pollen and drop the pollen. And once that time comes, you have about 48 hours per blossom. And anyway, what you want to do is shake those vines and watch a little bit that a little cloud of dust kind of drop, and that means that little blossom pollinated. To help in your cause, to pollinate those blossoms, go buy yourself a little cheap kids battery operated toothbrush at the local drugstore. You'll probably pay $6, $7, $8 for it. Uses a AA battery, and then what you're going to do is you're going to turn that toothbrush on, and you're going to tap each one of those blossoms. As you can see in the picture, you tap the top side of that blossom. If you see a little cloud of dust drop, you've just pollinated it. Now, keep in mind that tomato plant sends a code, sends a signal to all those blossoms when it's time to drop that cloud of dust. So you may tap that blossom today, no dust. You may tap that blossom tomorrow, and you see that little cloud of dust. So every day, if you get out there, tap them. With this toothbrush only, it doesn't even take a minute to do a whole tomato plant. And if you don't do any of this, you're still going to get a lot of tomatoes, but this is just how to help increase your production by, I would say probably 20-25%. Okay, let's move now from how you can help pollinate to how can you produce 50 to 100 pounds of tomatoes from one single plant. Okay, remember all those basics that we started with. You're going to need sunshine, and for a big plant with producing a lot of food, a lot of energy, you're going to need 8, 10, 12 hours of sunshine every day. Your backyard soil, you must dig that hole 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep. If you can dig it bigger, for a plant that's going to give you 50 to 100 pounds, dig it bigger. Throw away that dirt, fill that hole with water. It's must drain. Fill the hole then with a great potting mix soil. We showed you several different kinds to use. It has to have a lot of sphagnum peat moss in it. You're going to mix in some of that composted steer manure with compost. You're going to fill it up with water. You're going to tap it down a little bit. Fill up more potting mix right to the top. If you can, use some deep watering pipes on the outside, and you're going to get a big root system that's going to support a big top. This picture shows you the little 4-inch plants that went into the ground, and those are big 3-foot diameter cages, 8 feet tall, and those little guys are going to grow up in there. Now you're going to have to plant the proper variety. You can't just plant any tomato plant and figure it's going to produce 100 pounds of tomatoes. That some of these tomato plants, there's some heirlooms that if you get 6, 8, 10 tomatoes, you've got all that tomato plants capable of producing. So you need to put a plant in that's going to be capable of producing 100 pounds plus of beefsteak sized tomatoes. And this would be either like a Better Boy or a Big Beef. Now keep in mind, you do not want to plant them deep, right? Don't trim off any of the bottom leaves and stuff when you put that little guy in there. And you want a healthy 4 to 6 inch plant that's a Better Boy or a Big Beef. You're going to be planting in the early springtime, early March. You're going to make sure you use liquid fertilizer, follow directions, a manure tea if you can also. You're going to mulch 3 to 5 inch deep layer of straw around to protect the soil from that scorching hot weather once it comes. And you're going to make sure you have at least a 3-foot diameter heavy duty cage by about 7 to 8 feet tall. This just kind of shows you a little bit how they're growing. You see the bamboo sticks kind of holding the vines down, bringing them towards the outside of the cage where you can train those vines to grow up each one of those vertical wires. Another picture, you see as they continue to grow, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're going to grow into those 3-foot wide cages that are like 7.5 feet tall. Now, if you've done everything as we've suggested and talked about, that your tomato plant's easily going to grow to be about 4 foot wide, 8 feet tall, probably more. The vines will start to come back down to the top of the cage back down. You want to water and keep that soil moist. Slowly run that water to fill up the hole. If you got those deep watering pipes, fill those up a couple of times. Now these big guys are going to use at least 3 or 4 gallons of water every day. Remember, all that water is bringing all the nutrients and fertilizers up to the growing tips of the tomato plants. So you have a big root system and you have a big top. Kind of another, how are the tomatoes coming along? You can see that they're growing up to the top of that 7-8 foot tall cage. They're at least 4 foot wide, and they're really loading up with those tomatoes. The tomatoes, as you can see in the picture, are just starting to turn red. When it comes to pruning, remember we talked about allowing, those vines, and in that 3 foot wide cage, 3 foot diameter cage, you're going to have 16 to 18 vines growing up the outside of the cage, and you're training those vines up the outside and zip tying them loosely to those vertical wires going up. And as you can see in the picture, as your tomato plant, if your tomato plant was laying kind of flat, as it grows, you have a vine come out, you let the vine that comes out separate and grow into 2 vines at the end, and another one into 2 vines at the end. And when you get up towards the top, you can see how the growing tip splits off into 2, and you can get about 3 vines out of each one of those at the top. And you train all those vines to go to the outside of the cage and attached to a vertical wire going up to the top. Now, will it all be perfect when you do this? Well, of course not, but have some fun and try it with any of your tomato plants, and I think you'll do just fine. As you can see in the picture, you are looking at lots and lots and lots of tomatoes that there's no reason why you can't do the same thing. That follow those few tips, the important things that we talked about, you're going to load up with tomatoes. As those vines grow up the outside of the cage, they're going to grow like 2 leaves, a cluster of tomatoes, another 2 leaves, another cluster of tomatoes. Each of those vines, and you have maybe 16, 17 18 vines going up the outside vertical wires. Each one of those vines is going to it's going to produce 8 to 14 tomatoes. And without those zip ties holding them to that vertical wire, those vines will collapse. And where each leaf grows, a new vine will grow. Remember, snip them off. We want to keep a good balance between where that food is going, between new vine growth and new tomatoes. Well, there's that handsome guy again. And you can see this is what your result's going to be. You're going to have some big plants just absolutely loaded with tomatoes. And as mentioned, each one of these has over 100 pounds of beefsteak sized tomatoes. Okay, we're going to touch a little bit on pests and diseases, general plant health of these tomato plants, and there's more going to be discussed if you go to my website, blog site, on some of these pests and diseases that we're going to be talking a little bit about. But to start with, number one, I don't use any of pesticides and this sort of thing. And the number one thing that you need to do is you need to grow a healthy plant. You want to pick a good plant, give it plenty of sunshine, a great potting soil, the right amount of watering. You want to use liquid fertilizer when possible by plants that are disease resistant. It'll say on the tags when you pick them up. And always remember, a plant's goal in life is to reproduce fruit and seeds, and then it naturally is going to let down its guard and fighting pests and diseases and gradually die. So if you do end up with a sick plant, you know, forget trying to nurse it back to life. Just simply pull it out and put another one in. Blossom end rot. This is one that's fairly common, and it happens mostly with tomatoes that are grown in containers, and the larger size container or larger size tomatoes, it rarely, if ever, happens. I don't think I've ever heard of a cherry tomato getting blossom end rot, and that's where the bottom of the tomato has that big black spot on it. And if you go to my website, go to my blog site, and read more about it, I think for the most part you can avoid it. What you see in the picture here is a picture of a tomato that has that blossom end rot. It's that big black leathery spot on the bottom of the tomatoes, and you can read more about them on my website. Powdery mildew is another problem. You again jump over, take a look at the website. Not much to read about, but it'll show you how to avoid it. That's when your tomato leaves end up looking all white, and that's mostly from that sprinkler system or water floating in the air in the evening landing on the leaves, and then you have the little spores of mildew come in and land and start to spread. Most of the time you're going to get plenty of tomatoes, but try to keep the water off the leaves if you can. That's a picture of what the powdery mildew will look like. If you're kind of new at growing tomatoes, well, you're going to see it. I think most all of us see it. Hot weather is the enemy of tomatoes. Remember, when those daytime temperatures get above 85 and the nighttime temperatures above 75, this may send your tomato into a survival mode, and it's not going to be producing any more pollen until the weather cools down. And the best thing, the most important thing you can do is make sure you keep those roots moist. So to read more about the hot weather, and you can plant tomatoes that are resistant to the hot weather and will produce tomatoes at 90 degrees. So this is for the most part for most of your springtime tomatoes that keep those roots moist when it gets really hot out. And you can go to my website, my blog site, and read more about this. Nematodes, another pest and disease type thing. These are like little microscopic worms that get into the root system of the tomato plants and plug it up to where your plant cannot take up the moisture and the nutrients and send them on up to the growing tips. So there's good nematodes, there's bad nematodes. The bad nematodes mess everything up. Go to my website, you can read a little bit more. And remember, when you dig that hole and you throw away the dirt, you're throwing away those nematodes. So you fill it up with that new potting mix, potting soil, so you don't have to try and find a different spot in the yard to plant every year. This is a picture of the nematodes. You can see how gnarly they are and how they get in there and plug up the roots. Okay, more pests and diseases. Rats. Here in the city especially, rats are everywhere. Sometimes so many rats, they eat your green tomatoes. They don't even wait for the ripe ones. Myself, I poison them. They do prefer to eat the poison instead of the tomatoes. If you don't seem to have very many and you want to try and feed every rat in the neighborhood and end up with enough extra tomatoes for yourself, well, that's okay too. But whenever you're using poison, you have to be using absolutely extreme caution around kids and pets. If you would like a little bit more additional information on rat poison and poisoning the rats, send me an email. Okay, let's talk a little bit about when should you pick, when to pick those tomatoes, how to store your tomatoes. So it's a good time to pick, right time to pick when they're the right color. The tomatoes, reds, yellows, etc. When you squeeze that tomato and it's a tiny bit soft when squeezed, just like an avocado, good time to pick. And pick your tomatoes when you're ready to eat them, and you're going to get the very best vine ripened flavor. Don't store your tomatoes in the refrigerator unless they're cut up, because they almost immediately begin to lose their flavor once they're refrigerated. Once you pick the tomatoes and bring them in the house, store them in the kitchen on the countertop at room temperature. If you pick early tomatoes, pick them, say you pick them and they're still a little bit green, you do not need sunshine to finish ripening them. You can put them under your bed, in the trunk of your car, in your closet, doesn't matter where. That tomato plant, that tomato is still alive. That tomato plant sent that little tomato a little code, said, okay, go ahead and ripen, and once it starts to ripen, it'll continue to ripen. So doesn't matter where you put it. So now you know how to grow tomatoes easily. Sunshine, you need sunshine. Potting mix, potting soil, make sure you use the right one. They're not all equal. Fertilizer, make sure it's a liquid fertilizer for your tomatoes and for your vegetable garden. Watering tomato plants, remember those tomato plants can use 2 to 3 gallons of water every day. And you want to pick a tomato plant that's going to give you a lot of tomatoes, planted at the right time. And locally here in Southern California, it's early March. Grow tomatoes easily? Yes, I do it. And now you can do it. And if I can help, you have my email, you have my website, my blog site. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go Google Dave the Tomato Guy. Visit and bookmark my website, blog site. Now you have that green thumb. And go to my website, blog site, on how to grow tomatoes easily. The exact wording is all one word, growtomatoeseasily.biz. blogspot.com. Thanks again.